The French Foreign Legion is a multinational elite. Bound by blood, bound by honor. They never surrender, and they never quit.
Their whole reason for existence is to be combat troops. They are the ultimate professional soldiers.
From the scorched sands of Africa to the jungles of Vietnam, the French Foreign Legion has carved a legend.
That's like a group of small, fast-moving tanks coming at you. I would not want Foreign Legion coming at me.
Prepare to get locked and loaded as we trace the evolution of the French Foreign Legion. From the fearless warriors of the North African desert into France's most flexible strike force. It's time to go ballistic. The French Foreign Legion is the French Army's elite fighting force. Part of an international band of brothers, legionnaires fight for honor.
Every legionnaire is a brother at arms. His greatest strength is his desire to carry out every mission to the maximum.
In World War II, they stopped the Germans at the Battle of Bir Hakeim. In Vietnam, they defied overwhelming odds at Dien Bien Phu. And in Algeria, they fought a long and bloody guerrilla war. Today, they're keeping the peace in Africa and taking the war to the terrorists in Afghanistan. Since its creation, the Legion has used generations of cutting-edge combat rifles to take the fight to the enemy. The revolutionary 1886 Lebel that cut down France's foes in the trenches of World War I. The Mass 36, a big-hitting rifle that crushed Hitler's stormtroopers. And in the 21st century, the compact FAMAS, keeping the Legionnaires zeroed in on terrorists and rebels worldwide. The French Foreign Legion is the end result of 180 years of technological evolution and hard-fought combat. Now, Weaponology will unlock its family tree, going back through generations of technology to reveal how the forging of an empire, French military innovation, and a fighting spirit second to none has evolved the world's toughest light infantry unit, the French Foreign Legion. The Legion is one of a kind. The men in its ranks are foreigners fighting for France. It owes its creation to one man, French King Louis Philippe. During the 1830s, the king's government was threatened by foreign mercenaries and refugees.
They were drunk, they were fighting in the streets, they had no means of support, they were starving. The problem was that a lot of them had military training, and left on the loose, they were causing trouble, civil disobedience and unrest.
In 1831, Louis Philippe cleared them off the streets and formed them into a military unit, the Foreign Legion. They were foreigners, yes, but mercenaries, no way.
Mercenaries, if they're prepared to sell out to the highest bidder, they may well sell you down the river. You have to be very, very careful with them. In terms of the Foreign Legion, however, they're a national force serving a national will. They can't simply sell out to a highest bidder.
Fast forward to the 21st century, and foreigners still fill the Legion's ranks. Today, 140 nationalities serve under its banner. Each year, 6,500 men sign up at Legion recruiting offices. From this pool, only 850 will make it through the 4-month training course and become Legionnaires. These recruits have left their countries, families, and friends to fight for France. Why did they do it? Why not?
Why do people join the Legion? It can be varied. It can be unemployment. It can be the idea of testing yourself to see whether you're up to it. It can be the idea of redeeming your honor. Or it could simply be cutting yourself off from your past. You can seek anonymity in the Legion.
The Legion's multinational makeup creates a unique problem.
One of the great problems in training Legionnaires is that you have all these diverse cultures and diverse people and diverse languages, and you have to get them to gel as a unit.
To weld the recruits into a band of brothers, the Legion employs a punishing regime of physical training and indoctrination.
Most elite military units, the idea is first you tear down the civilian, and then you mold the elite soldier. The French Foreign Legion have to have a brutal training regimen. They're molding groups from dozens of countries into soldiers who can fight together as a team.
But the first step is to teach the recruits a common language. Orders are given in French.
Vous prenez un parti!
And if you can't communicate, you can't fight. For 3 months of Legion training, each non-French speaking recruit is paired with a man who speaks the language.
Ici, c'est plus à gauche.
They use the buddy system. Throughout the day and the night of training, you're put with a man who speaks your own language and French. So you pick it up from him.
Legion training ain't just about French homework. Recruits' bodies are chiseled into combat-ready machines through a grueling physical program. 30-mile speed marches, assault courses, simulated battles, and hand-to-hand combat. Legion training is tough and relentless. But each hurdle they overcome builds stronger links between the recruits.
There's a saying that says attrition breeds esprit de corps. If you go through very difficult training, once you get into that unit, realizing that individuals you're serving with have had to go through the same hurdles as you, that automatically breeds a closer camaraderie.
The recruits are bonded through French lessons and molded by tough physical training. But they are united by the third and most important component of recruit selection: indoctrination. The Legion demands complete loyalty. Its motto says it all: Legio Patria Nostra.
And that means very simply, the Legion is our homeland. You're no longer serving the Queen or loyal to the President of the United States. You are loyal to the Legion.
To build recruits' loyalty, the Legion has its own brand of rituals and symbols. Its marching song, Le Boudin. Its legendary headgear, the Kepi Blanc. And its green and red epaulets, symbolizing the blood they've spilled. All this makes the Legion different and distinctive. Even its weapons are unique. In the 21st century, its soldiers pack the futuristic FAMAS. Designed in the bullpup configuration with a magazine behind the trigger, the FAMAS is short and handy.
It is a very compact, very short weapon. This is very valuable when your personnel are in armored vehicles where space is at a premium. And it's also useful in vegetation, like in the jungle. Because this weapon is not bulky, you can use it in any situation and in any position.
The French love the FAMAS. But how does it stack up against the ultimate short shooter, the M4 carbine? Weapons guru Larry Vickers puts it through its paces.
What we're going to do demonstrate the accuracy and the controllability of the FAMAS and compare it to the M4 carbine. Okay, I'm going to take some body shots with the FAMAS F1, and then we're going to go headshots with the M4 carbine. Okay, let's see how the FAMAS F1 stacks up against the M4 carbine. Okay, what we have here are the shots in the body with the FAMAS F1. As you can see, still easily meets the standard for covering the shots with your hand at about 30 yards or so. But nevertheless, not as tight a group as what we have in the head with the M4. The FAMAS is a very shootable gun, very accurate, obviously. The trigger characteristics, sighting characteristics are such, the short sight radius, it's more difficult to make tighter shots. The M4, a gun I'm more used to, it's very easy to make tight shots, 30 yards or actually much beyond.
The FAMAS might not be the most accurate battle rifle, but for Legionnaires, it's not important. From their earliest origins, they've been trained to fight up close, to the death.
When all else fails, you fix bayonets and sally out to meet your death.
The men of the French Foreign Legion come from far and wide, but they are united by one common goal: to remain loyal to the Legion until death. The Legion's fight to the last man philosophy was forged in the mid-19th century by the leadership of their greatest hero, Captain Jean d'Anjou. A veteran of many engagements, d'Anjou was well known for a disfigurement that almost ended his military career.
Captain d'Anjou lost his left hand in 1853 in the south of Algeria. He had an accident with his rifle, which exploded in his hand. Captain d'Anjou obtained a new artificial hand, and thanks to his willpower and courage, he managed to avoid being declared unfit for service.
In 1863, France went to war with Mexico, and d'Anjou crossed the Atlantic to take part in the fight. There, he commanded at a battle that would make him a legend and go on to define the Legion's formidable warrior ethos. On April 30th, 1863, d'Anjou led 65 Legionnaires into the desert on a mission to escort a French baggage train through hostile territory. At 7 o'clock, after hours of marching, he ordered his men to rest. Through the early morning light, one of the Legionnaires spotted something alarming.
The men, first of all, saw a cloud of dust. They realized that an awful lot of horsemen were approaching, and since they didn't have horses, this had to be Mexicans, and they went for the nearest cover.
800 Mexican horsemen had seen the Legionnaires. Reacting fast, D'Anjou led his small company to a farmhouse called Hacienda Cameron.
Once they got into the abandoned ranch house, they were trapped in what was essentially a cowboys and Indians situation. A small number of men inside the buildings and an awful lot of Mexicans outside.
D'Anjou ordered his legionnaires into defensive positions and to ready their weapons. At 8 a.m., the Mexicans attacked. The firearm in the hands of D'Anjou's men has become an icon of Legion's small arms, the MLE 1859.
If there is a particularly mythical Foreign Legion weapon, it is definitely this rifle, the modified model 1859, used by legionnaires at the Battle of Cameron.
A percussion cap muzzleloader, the MLE 1859 was slow and cumbersome. But the projectile it fired was a merciless instrument of death called the Minié ball. It owes its genesis to visionary French inventor Captain Claude Minié. In the mid-19th century, he experimented with ways to increase the French rifleman's range and accuracy.
In the early part of the 19th century, muskets fired a spherical ball, and it was Minié who began thinking about producing conical bullets which produced better stability in the air and also offered the chance to getting it to expand into the rifling in a rifled weapon. The result of that was a weapon at Waterloo could probably fire accurately 100 meters. By 1850, you're able to fire perhaps 500 or 600 meters with a weapon still using gunpowder.
Packing the MLE 1859 locked and loaded with Minié balls, the Legionnaires knew they had excellent range, accuracy, and stopping power. But the Mexicans had an ace up their sleeve, one that would totally trump the Legionnaires' rifles.
The Mexicans were armed with a variety of weapons. Some still had smoothbore muskets, but a few had repeaters. The enemy had greater firepower. The result of that is, if the enemy are in overwhelming numbers, you will eventually go down.
The Mexicans poured fire onto the farmhouse. Legion casualties began to mount. The situation was desperate. But Captain D'Anjou was going nowhere. It was going to be a fight to the death.
When a lot of casualties had already been taken, Captain D'Anjou went round with a single bottle of wine, and each man had a sip out of the bottle of wine. And at the same time, he made them swear an oath not to surrender.
The fighting continued. Thousands of Mexican bullets tore into the hacienda. At midday, one caught Captain D'Anjou in the chest. He slumped to the ground and died. Their inspirational leader was dead, but the remaining Legionnaires fought on. By 6 p.m., only 5 of the original 65 remained standing. Each was down to his last round. They now had to make a decision: surrender or keep their promise to Captain D'Anjou and die for the Legion. Putting death before dishonor, the Legionnaires fixed bayonets and charged the Mexicans.
So these half-dozen hopeless men ran out towards the Mexicans to try and die really gloriously.
Hopelessly outnumbered, the Legionnaires didn't stand a chance. But just before the butchering started, fate intervened.
Luckily, a Mexican officer, Colonel Gambas, stood in front of the Mexicans and stopped them firing.
The Mexicans stopped fighting and spared the remaining legionnaires. The survivors didn't know it, but they'd made history.
Cameroon endures as the distinctive Battle of the Legion, and it's become that symbol of the Legion, not compromising, not surrendering. When the officers are done, the soldiers go on, and you do no deals. When all else fails, you fix bayonets and sally out to meet your death.
The Battle of Cameroon was over. But lying forgotten in the hacienda's smoldering ashes was the wooden hand of Captain d'Anjou. Discovered by a Mexican farmer, it was returned to the Legion. And today, the hand is its most precious possession, a symbol of every Legionnaire's responsibility to remain loyal to the very end.
La main du capitaine d'Anjou, c'est le
The hand of Captain d'Anjou is the symbol of the promise that all legionnaires make when they join the Legion.
Capitaine d'Anjou.
On that day, Captain d'Anjou had taken an oath to be loyal to the death.
Jusqu'à la mort.
From that day onwards, the Foreign Legion has considered itself to be under that same oath.
The Legion might have lost the Battle of Cameroon, but during the second half of the 19th century, it would win an empire. Using the most advanced French military inventions, the Legion would prove itself the hardest fighting troops in existence.
The Legion, with the 8mm Lebel cartridge, became the most lethal soldiers on the battlefield.
The French Foreign Legion is a hard-fighting outfit with a tough reputation, earned through guts, determination, and most importantly, outstanding combat weapons. And the weapon that built that reputation was a rifle that revolutionized the face of infantry warfare, the 1886 Lebel. The Lebel's genesis began with French inventor Paul Viel and the creation of smokeless powder. Up until the mid-19th century, muskets, rifles, and cannons used black powder to send projectiles hurtling toward the enemy. It did the job, but had some serious drawbacks.
The problem with firing any black powder weapon is that every time you fire, there's a cloud of smoke. The other problem is fouling. In other words, that the weapon gets increasingly more difficult to fire and eventually may stop.
Weaponologists around the world stepped up to solve these problems by searching for a cleaner, smokeless powder. The man who cracked it was French chemist Paul Viel. His secret was a substance called nitrocellulose.
Paul Viel looked at the problem of using explosives and looked at using nitrocellulose. It produces a very, very sharp report, plenty of energy, and relatively little smoke.
Viel refined his experiments and in 1884 created the world's first smokeless powder, Poudre B. 3 times more powerful than the old black powder, its battlefield potential was huge. But taming its explosive force would require a complete cartridge redesign. One man would make it happen. Step forward, Colonel Nicolas Lebel. A small arms genius, Lebel started work on a cartridge that could harness the power of Poudre B. In 1886, he presented his research. It was a revolution in ammunition design.
The Lebel cartridge represents a major breakthrough for many reasons. Earlier French firearms fired a larger caliber using black powder. Very low velocity, generally very inaccurate after a few shots. The Lebel cartridge fired a smokeless powder, a much smaller caliber 8mm bullet. This allowed the cartridge to push the bullet at a much higher velocity, resulting in further range, greater accuracy.
Lebel's new cartridge promised to crown the French infantry kings of the battlefield. But to turn that promise into reality, they needed a completely new rifle.
Having developed the Lebel cartridge, the French needed a rifle capable of taking advantage of its many superior qualities. This is that rifle, the 1886 Lebel rifle.
Rugged and reliable, the Lebel incorporated a fast bolt action, graduated sights accurate to 900 yards, and an 8-round tubular magazine. When put head-to-head with the .45 caliber black powder rifle, the combination of Lebel ammo and Lebel rifle literally blows away the competition.
Fire one round from each rifle at 2 blocks of clay. We will then compare the ballistic impact of the .45 caliber long rifle to that of the 8mm Lebel.
Clay accurately mimics the density of human tissue, graphically illustrating the destructive potential of the two different rounds. First up, the .45 caliber black powder rifle. Next, the 1886 Lebel.
This is the clay we shot with the musket ball. A lot of damage that would have occurred, but by the time the bullet exited the body, it would have lost virtually all of its speed. Soldier behind him, while he may have been hit with the ball, probably would not have been injured. Whereas comparing this to the 8mm Lebel round, large entry wound, very large exit wound. The round obviously still had a tremendous amount of killing power as it left the man's body. It's entirely possible the man behind him would have been struck and killed or severely injured as well.
When the Legion got their hands on the Lebel in the late 1880s, they had a super weapon.
The Legion, with the 8mm Lebel, obviously became the most lethal soldiers on the battlefield.
And the place they test drove the new rifle is synonymous with the Legion. The Sahara Desert.
The French Foreign Legion used this as their primary weapon, and in many of their forays in North Africa, this is the weapon that the French Foreign Legion had to go to war with.
Hot, dusty, and desolate, the Sahara was the ultimate test for both Legionnaire and rifle. The extreme conditions wore down the Legionnaire's flesh and bone, but the Lebel's rugged steel construction never broke down. In firefight after firefight, Legionnaires armed with Lebels decimated hostile Arab tribesmen. A string of Legion victories spread the French Empire across North Africa. The Lebel was the undisputed lord of the desert. But its biggest test would come when the French army waded into the mud and blood of World War I.
The French basically were involved in heavy combat from the very beginning of World War I, and this was their primary service rifle. This is what they fought in their trenches with.
Unfortunately for the French, rifle technology had moved on. The Lebel might have been cutting edge in 1886, but by 1914, it had been overtaken by better rifles, firing from fast-loading box magazines. And France's enemy, Germany, had millions of them. The odds were stacked against the Lebel-armed legionnaires. But when the bullets started flying, their combat experience from North Africa and their old Lebels wreaked havoc across the Western Front.
Particularly in the First World War, the Legion distinguished itself because it had been used to fighting irregular warfare, and it wasn't fazed by the conditions in the trenches. The Legion maintained its discipline, and they pulled no punches.
The Legion ended the war one of France's most highly decorated units. And the Legionnaires had proved that in their hands, the granddaddy of modern military rifles could still win battles. World War I had ended in victory for the Legion. But within a generation, Legionnaires would again see action. Armed with new, powerful rifles, they'd take on the Nazis in Europe and North Africa, fighting some of the hardest battles of World War II.
Their defense of Bir Hakeim was the stuff of legends.
There's only one thing tougher than a French Foreign Legionnaire, and that's the rifle he uses to bring death to his enemies. The heroes of Cameroon created a legend with the MLE 1859. And the class of 1918 smashed the Germans with the 1886 Lebel. But by the time Hitler unleashed the Blitzkrieg on France in 1940, it was time for an upgrade. To confront the Germans in battle, the Legion had traded in its old Lebels for the latest French small arm, the MAS 36. A tough bolt action, the MAS 36 fired a brand new cartridge, the 7.5 millimeter. But compared to the classic round of the period, the U.S. Army's 30-06, it was short and slow.
This is the 7.5 French cartridge, the mainstay of the French Army for most of the 20th century. Let's compare it to the 30-06 Springfield cartridge. As you can see, the French cartridge is slightly smaller, has slightly less powder capacity, and it is propelled at approximately 2,700 feet per second. The 30-06, slightly longer, more powder capacity, and a muzzle velocity of approximately 2,900 feet per second.
It might lose out on stats, but when put head-to-head in a ballistics test against the 30-06, the 7.5 punches well above its weight.
Okay, let's fire the 30-06 cartridge at the target. Let's fire the 7.5 millimeter French cartridge at the target. That was impressive. Hope it didn't get the camera. Okay, this is the 30-06 round. Fairly significant damage. Very large wound channel. Fairly devastating round. The 7.5 French, on the other hand, surprised me. Obviously, tremendous amount of ballistic impact. I think we can safely say that a MAS 36 firing the 7.5 millimeter French cartridge made the Legionnaire a force to be reckoned with on the battlefield.
Armed with the MAS 36 and the 7.5 cartridge, the Legionnaires took the fight to Hitler's stormtroopers. They fought hard, but even the Legion could not survive the Blitzkrieg. In the end, the French army fell apart,
One of the surprising things about 1940 was the rapidity of the French collapse. Anybody would have thought that the French would have withstood the German impact, and they didn't.
With the loss of France, round one had gone to the Germans.
These men are a symbol of the mighty force behind the Allied war effort.
But unfortunately for Hitler, there were thousands of legionnaires spread across the French Empire and Europe who were ready to join the field and even the score.
So again the Legion serves France. The Legion where heroism speaks every language, where men of all nations are united by a common love of freedom.
Two years after Hitler's victory, these fresh legionnaires would give his armies a taste of their venom in North Africa. During the Allies' desperate defense of the port of Tobruk in Libya, the Legion was ordered to defend a barren strip of desert called Bir Hakeim. But if there's one environment Legionnaires know how to fight in, it's sun-scorched sand and rock. The Legion turned Bir Hakeim into a fortress.
The Legionnaires got themselves dug in and built bunkers. At Bir Hakeim, fields of mines were laid, which meant that tanks and armored vehicles could be stopped.
With the defenses in place, the Legion hunkered down and waited for the Axis attack. And on May 26, 1942, it came. From their foxholes and emplacements, Legionnaires poured fire on the enemy with their mass 36s, machine guns, and artillery. German and Italian tanks were caught up in a hurricane of death. After 2 weeks of ferocious fighting, the Legion was exhausted and out of ammo. But their heroic defense had blunted the Axis advance and written another glorious chapter in Legion lore.
Their defense of Bir Hakeim against attack by both the Afrika Korps and the Italians was a stuff of legends.
After Bir Hakeim, Legionnaires took the fight to Europe, helping liberate France from the Nazis, and then storming the heart of the Third Reich. They ended the war as heroes. After a disastrous start to World War II, the Legion had picked itself up and come back fighting. But within a year of crushing the Nazis, the Legion was back on the front line defending the French colony of Indochina. Their opponents were the Viet Minh, communists hell-bent on creating an independent country called Vietnam. But more formidable than the Viet Minh was Indochina's terrain. Rough, humid jungle, hiding an enemy that would engage at ranges of 30 yards. To meet their needs, the Legion recruited a speedy, versatile American to their ranks, the M1 carbine.
Perhaps one of the most favorite Legion weapons was the M1 carbine. The Legion loved the weapon because it was lightweight, very easy to load, very easy to shoot, very quick to reload.
But the M1 carbine's convenience came at a cost.
This weapon represents a number of trade-offs. It is a much higher capacity weapon, 15 rounds, as opposed to 5 rounds for most bolt-action rifles. The cartridge, however, is essentially a pistol caliber cartridge. This gave it much less stopping power.
Firing a small caliber round makes the M1 carbine look pretty pathetic on paper. But there must be a reason why battle-hardened Legionnaires took it into combat. To find the answer, Weaponology puts its .30 caliber carbine cartridge up against its larger cousin, the big-hitting .30-06. First up, the .30-06 fired from a World War I P-17. Now, the M1 carbine firing its .30 caliber round.
Obviously, the Legion knew something that we didn't. This was the block of clay that was fired at by the .30-06 cartridge. See a fairly large entrance wound, larger exit wound. Comparing this to the M1 carbine, block has been split wide open, even though the carbine is a weaker weapon.
Surprisingly, the weaker M1 carbine .30 caliber round has done far more damage than the big .30-06. But how come?
Let's compare the cartridges. This is the .30-06 cartridge. This is the M1 carbine cartridge. .30-06, very pointed tip. Was able to cut through the clay, still generate a tremendous amount of ballistic damage, but also kept going.
But the lower velocity blunt tip carbine round lodged in the clay and exploded its energy inside. Generating that kind of damage, it was perfect for Indochina.
For the Legion, fighting in Indochina at ranges of typically less than 30 yards, the carbine represented an excellent weapon for them against the Viet Minh.
Legionnaires might have had the right tools for jungle warfare, but their senior commander's strategy should have been thrown in the trash. It relied on building fortified bases called hedgehogs deep in hostile territory.
The problem was it didn't work for the most part. Too many troops became static, and as a result, they were sitting ducks for attacks from the Viet Minh.
The battle that showed the French troops' vulnerability has gone down as one of the most infamous defeats in history. Dien Bien Phu. The largest hedgehog in Indochina, the fortified base at Dien Bien Phu was garrisoned with 9,000 legionnaires. But the French commanders had severely underestimated the Viet Minh, who had a surprise in store for the Legion. Heavy artillery.
What they did was bring up through the jungle everything they needed to surround the French fortress, even down to the extent of bringing up guns in individual pieces, reassembling them, carrying ammunition on bicycles through the jungle. It meant, in the end, what was meant to be a great fortress turned into a death trap for the defenders.
On March 13th, 1954, the Viet Minh unleashed hell. At 7 a.m., artillery shells exploded Dien Bien Phu's defenses, tearing into bunkers, gun pits, flesh and bone. Human wave attacks followed up the barrage. The struggle was close quarter and brutal. After 2 months of non-stop fighting, the defenders were exhausted. On May 8, 1954, Dien Bien Phu surrendered. The battle was a 20th century Cameron. Just like the battle in Mexico 91 years before, it would be immortalized through the Legionnaires' bravery.
It became, in Legion mythology, the sort of classic glorious defeat. So it went right back to the Cameron idea about coping with a more numerous enemy, and when all else fails, sallying forth and taking the bayonet to the Republic's enemies.
Indochina had left the Legion with a bloody nose and ended French colonial rule in the Far East. But within months of the defeat, Legionnaires would be back in action, and they'd be fighting their biggest battle yet, for their very existence.
They'd already lost one war, and they didn't want to lose another.
The French Foreign Legion is one of the roughest, toughest global elites. Its soldiers have different nationalities, different languages, different religions. But on the battlefield, they fight and die as one. For most of its 180-year history, this unity has been maintained by imposing harsh discipline. And the popular image of Legion discipline is a Legionnaire buried up to his neck in sand. But the reality was much worse.
One of the punishments we had was called a tombeau. You'd have to dig a trench in the shape of a coffin and lie in it all night. And if it was snowing, it was snowing, and if it was raining, it was raining.
If sleeping in your own grave wasn't bad enough, the Legion had other methods to make you comply.
We had a punishment called the plot. A sack of rocks on your back with wire shoulder straps instead of a normal strap, and rocks in the back, and boots without laces, so you slopped and used to run around a circle like a horse. One blast of the whistle, forward roll. 2 blasts of whistle, march at knees bend, and 3 blasts of whistle, you fall on the stomach, crawl on the stomach.
The Legion liked to dish it out to insubordinates. But in 1961, it would be the Legion who'd break the rules and be left reeling from a crippling punishment. Rewind to 1954. And the Legion is fighting insurgents in Algeria. Algeria was more than a simple deployment. It was the Legion's home.
Algeria was a hard war, fought very often by small units, fought very often deep in the countryside, which was in many areas hostile to French troops. It's a war of raids and ambushes, the bullet in the back, the attack at dawn.
Using modern airborne tactics, the Legion contained the insurgency on the ground. But the president, Charles de Gaulle, decided to pull out. The French army and the Legion felt betrayed. In 1961, a few rebellious officers decided to take matters into their own hands.
A number of senior regular army generals decided to rebel against Charles de Gaulle, and particularly important to their plans were the Legion forces.
The rebel leader's coup revolved around dropping Legion paratroopers onto the streets of Paris to topple de Gaulle. But when the French president threatened to blow them out of the sky, the leaders lost their nerve and bolted. De Gaulle had stared down the rebels. Now he was going to give the Legion a taste of its own medicine and inflict a devastating punishment.
So the only Legion unit that did take part in the rebellion was the 1st Parachute Regiment, and de Gaulle's reward for it, when the rebellion collapsed, was to disband the unit.
The coup had achieved nothing. The Legion had made many enemies and was labeled dangerous.
The Legion is seen as being anachronistic. It's seen as being militarily archaic. It's seen as being a threat to French democracy.
The Legion had been surrounded from all sides before and knew exactly what to do. Come back fighting. From the ashes of Algeria, Legion officers regrouped and planned a revamp of the Legion, starting with its remaining parachute regiment, the 2nd Rep.
Le 2e régiment étranger de parachutistes.
The 2nd French Foreign Legion Parachute Regiment, an elite regiment, underwent a transformation from 1962 under the initiative of its chief, Colonel Caillot, who made the unit the most versatile unit in the whole of the French army. The 2nd Rep has been the laboratory for French Special Forces.
Des forces spéciales françaises.
Over 40 years, the 2nd Rep has evolved into an elite, taking on any mission in the military playbook.
The 2nd Foreign Legion Parachute Regiment, that is an elite unit. You have members of the 2nd Rep that are trained as mountain troops, some as boat and scuba troops, some as snipers, some as halo troops. So the 2nd Rep is definitely an elite unit, and it could be compared to elite units in other armies.
Versatile and deadly, the 2nd Rep still leads the way for the Foreign Legion as it marches into the 21st century. Over the past 180 years, the French Foreign Legion has witnessed the rise and fall of an empire, fought some of the toughest battles in history, and been at the forefront of military technology. Drawn together, the branches on its family tree reflect its unique genesis. The Battle of Cameroon created a never-say-die ethos. French ingenuity spawned generations of powerful combat rifles. The collapse of an empire produced a modern and versatile fighting force, the French Foreign Legion. The most powerful light infantry in the world.